I'm a basic neuroscientist and a sleep researcher, so of course it's very unusual for me to be at this conference. And before meeting Claire, which was really a highlight in our discussion, so it was really interesting to discover how much we have in common in terms of our interests. I know that the title of my talk is not too loud. Should I talk? The title of my talk is rather ambitious, but I will try to keep it more focused on my main interest, sleep, and everything that is around it. So of course we know that we exist on a spectrum of states. Sleep is just one of them, and but I'm quite amazed that all the states that we are discussing today, they have not been properly mapped on our current knowledge of what we or our body or our brain is capable of producing in terms of states, normal and abnormal. But I will focus on my favorite state, which is sleep and everything related to sleep, because of course this is very important. So we spend 1/3 of our life in this state, and sleep or nighttime we already mentioned here on a few occasions. And some of you know that nighttime is somewhat vulnerable and dangerous to the condition that we are discussing for many reasons, probably, which we still have to understand, but also that sleep is associated with altered awareness and also altered movement and control of movement. So we already heard earlier from Matthew about decision making and initiating movement, but sleep has a somewhat different angle here, because we are defining sleep by the lack of movement. So if you look at the classical defining criteria of sleep, is the first one is physical quiescence. So this is something that we can, a criterion that we can apply to a broad variety of animals. It's very simple, very intuitive, but I will show you a number of exceptions from that, and this is really the core of my talk. First of all, you can be completely immobile but awake, or you can be completely immobile and look like you're sleeping but exist in a very different state. So it could be freezing when an animal is attacked by a predator. It could be this wonderful state called thanatosis, or when animals pretend to be dead, but they're very conscious, very well aware of what is happening. And there are some hibernation, and there are some abnormal states like coma or anesthesia. So you can be immobile but not sleeping. So something opposite happens during sleep, because during sleep you can engage in a whole range of movements of all kinds, but if you think, it happens without your conscious control. So you can move without being aware of that. So my favorite example in this video I made in a zoo in South Korea. This is a seal, and it engages in a unihemispheric sleep. So this animal, according to a criteria, electrophysiological criteria, if you were to record brain activity, is asleep, but with only half of the brain at a time. So it has to, but it maintains this very exquisite balance. So it can stay for hours like this, being sort of awake and asleep at the same time. So we know that we can be twitching during sleep, and scientists study this, for example, in neonate rodents, where you can attach many sensors to the body and you can record a variety of very elaborate movements in these pups who are very immature, but they engage in movement. So they went at great lengths classifying types of movements, and if you are interested, you can go on this website. I hope it still exists, called twitchsleep.net, where you can find many animals twitching and moving during sleep. Movement during sleep can also be associated with pathology. So parasomnias is a type of sleep disorders associated with movement. So, for example, sleepwalking is one type of parasomnia, and this starts usually from non-rapid eye movement sleep. And again, without being aware, subjects can engage in very complex behaviors. Or it could be RBD, REM behavior disorder, when patients start moving during their REM sleep, REM sleep, and sometimes it is explained as acting out their dreams. the behavior can become even quite violent, and this is associated with the loss of muscle atonia during REM sleep. A very interesting neurological condition is called periodic limb movement, which is associated with the restless leg syndrome. And this is something that is often associated with sleep. It happens completely involuntary, without the control of the subject. It occurs periodically, usually every 20-30 seconds. There is this movement which is initiated absolutely spontaneously, without patient having any control over it. Going back to another type of parasomnia, which is called confusional arousal, these patients again may exist at the same time in two states, in sleep state and wake state. And this you can determine, like in those dolphins or seals, by recording from different parts of the brain, and you can see that some types of activity, such as slow waves, they happen in some parts of the brain, but in other parts of the brain, the EEG looks completely awake. So I already mentioned slow waves a few times, and I would like to talk a bit more about that. So this is how brain activity looks when you or an animal is sleeping. And I have to say that we know a lot about what happens inside the brain from animal experiments, but also from patients with epilepsy who were implanted with electrodes for diagnostic purposes. And this is where we discover this very interesting pattern. So this would be the EEG signal, EEG slow waves. And this is a record of which we call multi-unit activity. This is neuronal spiking. So each of these lines indicate an action potential of a neuron. It basically shows when neurons are active and when they're quiet. And this is a membrane potential of individual neuron, which goes between activity and silence. So when you're asleep, in stage 3 sleep primarily, the brain goes between generalized silence and generalized activity with a frequency of about 1 Hertz. So we call them slow waves. Slow waves are, and why I'm so focusing on that, they're really interesting because there are many conditions apart from sleep when you can observe this pattern of activity. So you can even observe slow waves when patient loses consciousness, like during a syncope. You can see an occurrence of brain activity very similar to sleep. But you can also produce slow waves when you are awake, and it is likely that if I record your brain activity everywhere, we'll find that parts of your brain will be asleep. So, and this would correlate with how tired you are. So when you are sleep deprived, there will be intrusion of sleep-like patterns in your brain activity. And this is what scientists find in laboratory animals, in laboratory rats, for example. So when you keep the animal awake by providing novel objects for the animal to play, the animal is very interesting. They have this natural propensity for exploratory behavior. And if you monitor their brain waves and the activity of neurons in the brain, you find something very peculiar. So at the beginning of this procedure we call sleep deprivation, neurons fire very fast and irregular manner. But later the animal may look completely awake, alert, it will look at you, but neurons start showing this periods of activity. If you remember this alternation between activity and silence. So the animal goes in a dissociated state. It is half awake, half asleep. And this is probably the state where animal may engage in behaviors without even realizing or noticing that it is doing that. So in my lab, we study one very peculiar behavior, running on the wheel. So I was very glad that in the previous talk it was runner's high was mentioned. And this is exactly what mice do. So you give them the running wheel, and this is how circadian neurobiologists show the data. So this is day, this is night, another day, another night, and when you see these black bars, this is when the mouse is running. So when it's given the wheel, it can jump on the wheel and run for 20 kilometers a night. It's really remarkable. So it takes short breaks, and then it goes back on the wheel and runs again. It enters a very, very peculiar state. It's dark because it runs only during the night, but it's stuck in space and time and just keeps running. If you give a choice of some palatable food and running, the mouse would prefer to run. And endorphins were indeed implicated in this, and also in the endocannabinoid system. So we were wondering what happens in the brain during this absolutely remarkable state. So, and what we find was absolutely unexpected. So when we look at brain neurons in mice running on a wheel, we found that they, rather than increase in activity, they reduce their firing. So the way we did it, we put small sensors next to the wheel, and we could record as the wheel is rotating. Every time this runs, of the wheel would cross the sensor. And this is what is shown here. So this shows how fast the wheel is rotating. And this is a recording of one channel. You can see that the animal is running. There is not much activity. The brain is kind of quiet. The animal stops running, and there is a lot of activity in the brain. And this is another example shown when the animal, the brain is very active, and then when it starts running, it quiets down. And this is a video showing one example. You can see very remarkable. Again, these are some recording of a neuron. This is running wheel activity. I hope you can see that every time when the animal slows down, neuron starts spiking, and otherwise it's quiet. So it's a very, very peculiar state when behaviorally the animal is highly active, but there is not much activity. So this could be a reflection of this dissociated or maybe even trance-like state. And I will show you just another example of this very peculiar repetitive behavior. In this experiment, we trained mice to do a touch screen task. So mice, I have to tell, are very intelligent animals, so it's completely not true that they're not very smart. You just need to be more patient and need to find a more ecologically relevant task. So these animals learn to go initiate the trial, go back, touch the screen, and go back again and collect a reward, like a tiny drop of a milkshake. So these animals, when they get what they have to do, they start going back and forth. They can do this for hours. So this is, for example, a plot showing hours and how many trials this animal performed. And actually, in our very first experiment, so we started experiment in the morning, and my student called me at 9 p.m. And she said, the animal is still doing the task. What should I do? So, and we had to stop it. So this, again, remarkably interesting behavior, which is self-sustained, that the animal apparently cannot stop, it just engage, and which may be, again, relevant for understanding trichotillomania and other conditions. What we were surprised to find is that the animal does not get tired. So it can do this for many hours, actually during the day, and mice are nocturnal, they don't get tired. And if you look closely, you find many other conditions in the wild where you find this very peculiar mixture of sleep and wake that can replace normal wake or sleep activities. So this is the last data slide that I showed. This paper just came out showing, looking closely at rumination in reindeer. So they spend a lot of their time asleep chewing, and apparently their brain activity looks very much like during sleep, and apparently they dissipate their sleep pressure, sleep drive by rumination. So you can exist in this very peculiar, very automatic, repetitive state, which is very different from wake or sleep, but maybe a separate, distinct state on its own. So going back to this famous diagram showing that we rarely exist in wake or asleep, but very often in some sort of mixed state. So I think we need to find a place for other conditions and really to be more kind of open to the possibility that we can exist in many different states, and this is how we can understand conditions like trichotillomania. This is it. Thank you very much. I'd like just to thank my group and funders, and thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today.